Hi, I'm Pastor Mike from Park Avenue Baptist Church. It's great to have you with us today for today's sermon. We want to be a church that helps people. So if we can pray for you, or if you just need someone to talk to, we'd encourage you to fill out the connection card in the comments section below, and we'll get back with you. Thanks again for being with us, and we hope today's sermon is a blessing to you.
Christ is my reward and all of my devotion. Now there's nothing in this world that could ever satisfy. Through every trial, my soul will sing, no turning back. I've been set free. Christ is enough for me. Christ is enough for me. Everything I need is in you. Everything I need. Christ, my all in all, the joy of my salvation. Oh, and this hope will never fail. Heaven is our home. Through every storm, my soul will sing, Jesus is here. To God be the glory. Christ is enough for me. Christ is enough for me. Everything I need is in you. Everything I need. I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back. No turning back. I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back. No turning back. The cross before me, the world behind me. No turning back. No turning back. The cross before me, the world behind me. No turning back. No turning back. Christ is enough for me. Christ is enough for me. Everything I need is in you. Everything I need. Christ is enough for me. Christ is enough for me. Everything I need is in you. Everything I need. I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back. No turning back. I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back. No turning Jesus, no turning back, no turning back. I have decided to follow Jesus, no turning back, no turning back.
Good morning, Park Avenue Baptist Church. Thanks so much for being with us. Before we get started today, just wanted to talk to you a little bit about reopening here at the physical site. The leadership team here is working on finalizing plans, and we plan to make an announcement next weekend so that you will know what is coming in terms of being able to gather together again. So just know that announcement is coming, and keep praying for us as we finalize these things. Today, we want to continue. This is week 2 of our series, starting at the end, looking at the Old Testament wisdom book of Ecclesiastes. And right off the bat, I need to give you a spoiler alert. That is, you're listening to a church sermon, so the answer at the end will end up being God. You probably already expected that, but I just wanted to let you know I am not going to disappoint. We are going to end up playing the God card. As well we should. It's church, and he does hold answers for us the same way he held answers for Solomon. And so, knowing where we're headed doesn't have to ruin everything for you, however, because knowing the destination isn't the same as taking the journey. I don't know if you've ever been part of a road trip, maybe with family, maybe with friends, and you were excited about where you were headed and what you were going to do. But these are also people you just love spending time with. So being stuck in a vehicle with them for several days or several hours, whatever it may be, you were like, this is going to be wonderful. This is going to be fun. We're going to laugh until our sides hurt. So we want to take a journey today, and I think the journey will be as enjoyable for us and as beneficial for us as the destination. I have a question for you. I'd like you to be honest, and even if you're watching all by yourself, I would like you to participate by raising your hand if this is true for you. Have you ever cheated on a test? Go ahead, raise your hand. It's okay. Okay. Now, by no means do I want to be coaching anyone on best practices in terms of cheating, other than maybe don't. But if you're going to cheat, typically you're looking to cheat off someone who's better at this subject than you are, that you think knows more of the answers than you do. It's not the best idea or the best strategy to end up seated next to the class idiot and going, oh, I'm going to cheat off his paper, and this is going to be wonderful. This will work out well for me. Well, today, hold on to your hats. Your pastor is going to encourage you to cheat. I'm going to encourage you to cheat on the most important test you will ever take, and it's the test of life. And I want to encourage you today to peek on King Solomon's paper and check out the answers he came up with, because you don't have to live through everything he did. You can skip to the end conclusion and say, I want to live my life in light of that. You and I have a wonderful benefit that we don't have to accumulate all the same regrets that King Solomon did. So, just a little bit of review from last week. What has life taught you, Solomon? This was a book that he wrote late in life, dealing with a lot of regrets, and pretty much his summary statement is, everything is meaningless, which is hugely inspiring for us, isn't it? But Solomon had all the abundance, all the power, and all the pleasure a man could want, and it wasn't enough to satisfy him. That's a challenging thing for us. We talked through some different ideas. Let me just run down through these. This is going to be so exciting. You're going to be so glad you got up. Life is cyclical. It just goes round and round in circles. It's hard to make forward progress because everything circles back around. Life is frustrating. Amen? Life is futile. You can wonder, what am I doing all of this for? How is it going to end up? Life is finite. You don't get to control when it starts, and you don't get to control when it ends. And last, life at some point is finished. And then there's no further contributions, no further adjustments. It's just done. Not so much encouraging. Life by itself is meaningless. There's an important distinction there. Because true satisfaction can only be found in God. It can only be found when we rise up above the vicious cycle and latch onto something that's more enduring. When we look at life from God's perspective, we can see who can satisfy us and what never will. Those are important things for us to grapple with. Today, we want to look at the very end of Ecclesiastes 1 and the sum of Ecclesiastes 2. And the idea that we're going to be looking at here is that Solomon searches for meaning in four likely places. Four places where he was pretty sure, I'm going to find meaning there, certainly. But they all failed him. And so we want to follow along on his journey, and hopefully we can learn some things that help us not to have to travel all the same paths that he did. We're going to start with some verses that we looked at last week. I'm just going to read through those, and they provide our first of these four places that Solomon looked. Ecclesiastes 1, beginning in verse 12. I, the teacher, was king of Israel, and I lived in Jerusalem. I devoted myself to search for understanding and to explore by wisdom everything being done under heaven. I soon discovered that God has dealt a tragic experience to the human race. I observed everything going on under the sun, and really, it is all meaningless, like chasing the wind. What is wrong cannot be made right. What is missing cannot be recovered. I said to myself, look, I am wiser than any of the kings who have ruled in Jerusalem before me. I have greater wisdom and knowledge than any of them. So I set out to learn everything, from wisdom to madness and folly. But I learned firsthand that pursuing all this is like chasing after the wind. The greater my wisdom, the greater my grief. To increase knowledge only increases sorrow. Now, you may be finding those verses just as encouraging as you did when we read them last week. But what I want us to arrive at right now is this, that Solomon searched for meaning in education and learning, and it failed to give him the meaning he craved. He thought it would do it. He thought, I'll just learn more, I'll just study more. He was the wisest man who had ever lived at that time. Surely he could find answers that would satisfy, and they did not. So we move on. Before we look at the next verses in Ecclesiastes, I just want to take a quick look at Solomon's credentials, his accomplishments. If we go back to 1 Kings chapter 11, we're going to look at 3 verses there. Chapter 10, the end of chapter 10, is a listing of all things Solomon accomplished in terms of what he owned, what he built, And it's quite an impressive list. We then get to chapter 11, and it says this. Now, King Solomon loved many foreign women. Besides Pharaoh's daughter, he married women from Moab, Ammon, Edom, Sidon, and from among the Hittites. The Lord had clearly instructed the people of Israel, you must not marry them, because they will turn your hearts to their gods. Yet Solomon insisted on loving them anyway. Then we get to verse 3. He, meaning Solomon, had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines. And in fact, they did turn his heart away from the Lord. That's a powerful lead-in for us as we look at this next area and the verses from Ecclesiastes 2 that address this. I said to myself, come on, let's try pleasure. Let's look for the good things in life. And I found that this too was meaningless. Now, Solomon had 1,000 women devoted to him, and it did not satisfy him. Probably should tell us something. Verse 2. So I said, laughter is silly. What good does it do to seek pleasure? After much thought, I decided to cheer myself with wine. And while still seeking wisdom, I clutched at foolishness. If that is not a powerful summary on what happens to us when we seek escape in illicit ways, be that chemical or otherwise. While still seeking wisdom, I clutched at foolishness. In this way, I tried to experience the only happiness most people find during their brief life in this world. So his commentary was, getting drunk is the closest most people ever get to being happy. Wow, that's a pretty sad assessment. So, Solomon searched for meaning in entertainment and pleasure, and it failed to give him the meaning he craved. That's pretty significant given that we live in a culture that is built upon just experience more, own more, have a more exciting vacation. We're a culture that's built on entertainment and pleasure. And Solomon had access to more of it than you or I probably ever will. And he found that it didn't satisfy. Third, I want to look at a couple verses. I'm just going to summarize this section. I'd encourage you to read it for yourself in its totality. Verse 4 says, I also tried to find meaning by building huge homes for myself and by planting beautiful vineyards. In the next couple of verses, he unpacks further the things that he did to try to find meaning. We get down to the end of verse 8, and he says, I had everything a man could desire. And then verse 10, he says, anything I wanted, I would take. I denied myself no pleasure. And then verse 11, we hit his summary. But I looked at everything I'd worked so hard to accomplish. It was also meaningless, like chasing the wind. There was nothing really worthwhile anywhere. Wow. Now, I want to jump a couple verses. We're going to come back to them, but it's almost like Solomon sticks in here kind of a parenthetical thought. It's not unimportant. In fact, it's very important. But we want to jump ahead to verse 18 because that really continues this same line of thinking. I came to hate all my hard work here on earth. for I must leave to others everything I have earned. And who can tell whether my successors will be wise or foolish? Yet they will control everything I have gained by my skill and hard work under the sun. How meaningless. So I gave up in despair, questioning the value of all my hard work in this world. Some people work wisely with knowledge and skill, then must leave the fruit of their efforts to someone who hasn't worked for it. This, too, is meaningless, a great tragedy. So what do people get in this life for all their hard work and anxiety? Their days of labor are filled with pain and grief. Even at night, their minds cannot rest. It is all meaningless. Wow, Solomon, talk about bleak. But Solomon found that he searched for meaning in accomplishments and productivity, and it failed to give him the meaning that he craved. And we live in a culture today that, well, if it's not going to be about entertainment and pleasure, then it's certainly going to be about accomplishments and productivity. Like, I don't have time for all that silly stuff. I have things to accomplish. And plenty of lives are bound up in both. But Solomon accomplished phenomenal things, and he realized, wait, I'm going to leave it all behind. It's all meaningless. Our fourth area that we want to look at is actually taking us back in that parentheses to verses 12 to 17. I want to read those for you. I'm not going to put those up here on the screen, but I didn't want to, didn't want to skip by those because I feel like these are incredibly important for us. Ecclesiastes 2, beginning in verse 12. So I decided to compare wisdom with foolishness and madness. For who can do this better than I, the king? I thought, wisdom is better than foolishness, just as light is better than darkness. For the wise can see where they are going, but fools walk in the dark. Yet I saw that the wise and the foolish share the same fate. Both will die. So I said to myself, since I will end up the same place as the fool, what's the value of all my wisdom? This is all so meaningless. For the wise and the foolish both die. The wise will not be remembered any longer than the fool. In the days to come, both will be forgotten. And then verse 17, his summary, let me put this before us. So I came to hate life, because everything done here under the sun is so troubling. Everything is meaningless, like chasing the wind. So his final area, having exhausted these other three, his final area that he explored was searching for wisdom in wisdom and a life well lived. Because that sounds like that should be the right answer. That sounds like that would be the good religious thing. But it failed to give him the meaning that he craved. And so I have a really important question for us today. And that would be this. If Solomon couldn't find meaning in education and learning, or entertainment and pleasure, or accomplishments and productivity, or wisdom and a life well lived, then what hope do we have of finding meaning anywhere? I mean, if Solomon he didn't even not just not do well on the test, he failed the test. And he's the wisest guy who's ever lived. What shot do I have? Like, even cheating off his paper doesn't seem like it's going to help me any. So, Are these good things? Education and learning. Is that a good thing? Yes. Entertainment and pleasure. Are those good things? Within appropriate boundaries? Yes. Accomplishments and productivity, are those good things? Yes. Wisdom and a life well lived. Oh, absolutely. We don't even have to qualify that one at all. Yes, these are all good things, but even good things can be corrupted and misused. Satan specializes in it. Even good things have their limits, and they can never be the ultimate things that our hearts were made for. So are they good things? Yes. Are they ultimate things? No. So they can't satisfy our craving for meaning. So again, I just want to ask you, if Solomon couldn't find meaning in these things, this pretty substantial list, then what hope do you and I have of finding meaning anywhere? Well, we're not at the end of chapter 2 yet. So let's keep going a little bit. Verse 24. So I decided that there is nothing better than to enjoy food and drink and to find satisfaction in work. Sounds like he kind of gave up. He just went, I guess I'll just settle for the best I can come up with out of those categories. I mean, I'll do what I can and be as happy as I can, and I will just kind of ignore that nagging void in me that is searching for meaning. And that's where many people get stuck. Maybe you feel stuck there, where you're like, I'm just going to do the best I can and hope it's enough, and I'm going to be as happy as I know how to be. It's the you only live once mentality. But Solomon realized something, and hopefully we will too. You see, for Solomon, he got to this point, and a light bulb went on. And he said, and then I realized that these pleasures are from the hand of God. For who can eat or enjoy anything apart from him? Now I want to take a moment just to unpack that, because I would suggest to you that all pleasure, all good things are sourced in God, the Creator. Now, and you would say, wait, I can think of some things that people utilize to find pleasure I don't think God approves of. And I would agree with you. But I think all legitimate pleasure is sourced in God as Creator. And then Satan loves to twist and pervert those good things. You see, Satan has never been a creator. He can't make anything new. The only thing he knows how to do is to distort. And so, God is the author of sex. And he says that in the appropriate boundaries, it is a very, very good thing. But Satan twists that. And as a result, we have abuse and rape and pornography and dozens of other corruptions of what God gave that was good. God invented food, and Satan twisted it into the all-you-can-eat buffet. We just need to be aware of how our God works and how Satan works. Final verse, verse 28. God gives wisdom, knowledge, and joy to those who please him. But if a sinner becomes wealthy, God takes the wealth away and gives it to those who please him. And now some of you, like me, are reading that verse and going, whoa, 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 time out. I've lived enough life. That's not the way it always goes. Sometimes it seems like the sinful people get wealthy and they keep their wealth. And those who are being wise and seeking to please God, they just remain poor. So Solomon didn't know what he was talking about. Yes, he did. Yes, he did. It always works out this way. Eventually. Sometimes we just don't have the perspective, or we don't live long enough to see God do what God does. God does eventually set it right. We can trust him with that. And then he ends, this too is meaningless, like chasing the wind. And I think part of what Solomon is saying there is that even the fact that God eventually sets it right is a small comfort if I don't live to see it. If I don't get to see it set right, does it really matter that it will get set right? Because it doesn't help me. And I'm reminded of what Jesus said in Matthew 5, verse 45. He said he gives sunlight to both the evil and the good, and he sends rain on the just and the unjust alike. We would really like it if there was just this very nice, neat, straight line that if I go to church and be a good boy or a good girl, then God's going to bless me in very obvious and abundant ways. And the bad people, those sinners, they're going to get punished, like now. And it's not that clear-cut. And that's okay. You see, money and stuff are not prizes you can hold on to. They always slip away. Belonging to God is the prize, and it can never be taken away from you. That's powerful, but it's hard for us to hold on to. So, big idea that I'd like us to come to after taking this whole journey with Solomon. Finally, Solomon searched for meaning in knowing and loving God. And it gave him the meaning that he craved. Now, I want to unpack two ideas from there and then give you some application, some very simple application. First of all, knowing and loving God. We get all twisted up about that and what that means and what it doesn't. So I want to help clarify real quick. First of all, what knowing and loving God isn't. Knowing and loving God isn't just showing up at church. It's not just reading the Bible. It's not just being a good person, and it's not just dodging the big sins. Now, can each of those things be a component of knowing and loving God? They can, but they can also be part of trying to prove our worth to God and to other people. And that's not part of knowing and loving God. So if that's what it isn't, what is it? Well, I think knowing and loving God is realizing that you have a sin problem that you cannot fix, but that he can. Because that's giving agreement to what God says and saying, God, if you say that's true, I don't like it, but then I submit to that truth. Secondly, it's inviting him to fix it. It's one thing to go, oh yeah, I have a sin problem. I got to do something about that. It's a whole nother thing to say, God, I can't fix this myself. I need you. I need the salvation that you offer. And if you don't know quite what we're talking about there, we would love to get to have further conversation with you about that. Please get in touch with us. We would love to answer those questions. Knowing and loving God is continuing on the good path of gospel transformation. And that means as long as you're still breathing, God still is changing you. There's no settling in and saying, oh, I'm good enough now because I'm better than most of the people. And I would ask, are you better than Jesus? Because he's the goal. And God wants to keep moving you closer and closer to that. Lastly, knowing and loving God is letting his word reorder your desires, thoughts, priorities, and actions. And that is an ongoing process because we get back off course. We get wrongly focused on the wrong things, and it steals life and it steals meaning from us. And so we have to keep kind of resetting ourselves back to, wait, what did God say again? And it's not our effort. It's our surrender. It's saying, God, I need you to do what I can't. Lastly, finding the meaning he craved didn't mean that life wasn't still hard. So getting to the end of Ecclesiastes chapter 2 and having Solomon go, oh, meaning is found in God. It didn't undo all his regrets, and it didn't make all the other lessons easy. So for us, when I find meaning in knowing Jesus, it doesn't mean that life becomes a fairy tale. It just doesn't. We live in a broken world. Our world is messy. We're messy. We need to keep surrendering to him. I had a quote that I came across. I love this quote. It's one of my favorites. Philip Yancey said this: the only thing worse than disappointment with God is disappointment without God. Life in this world is hard, but it doesn't get easier by turning your back on God and saying, I've got this. You've disappointed me. We need his help. Let me give you a couple of 3 simple tools to help you. How do I keep finding meaning in God? Number 1, notice simple delights daily. And give God the credit he's due. I think any person on the planet can say, oh, I'm going to notice the good things in my day. I'm going to think positive. I'm not asking you to think positive. I'm asking you to think godly. I've done something called a gratitude journal. Just taking a notebook, keeping it on your bedside table, and when you get to go to bed at night, before you're allowed to turn off the light and lay down, you write down that day's date. You number 1, 2, 3, or if you're really ambitious, 1 to 5. And just jot down 3 things or 5 things out of your day that you're like, wow, that was really neat. It doesn't have to be big provisions. It might be. It might be a conversation. It might be a sunset. It might be watching children play at the park. Often it's going to be very simple things, but that those things point us that there is a God who is orchestrating. I think about Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers, as most of us know him. And as a kid, he was very troubled by natural disasters, catastrophes, human suffering. And his mother very wisely would tell him, Fred, look for the helpers. When there's that amount of pain and suffering, look for the people that are there to help and find comfort there. And he did. And so I think that's one of those things that we could put in a gratitude journal of just going, I'm going to notice the good. I'm going to notice the helpers. There's something powerful about this exercise because once you start doing this, then you're going to start your day on high alert looking for things that you want to write down at night. And it makes a powerful difference in how you proceed throughout your day. So I would like to challenge you to keep a gratitude journal for at least the next 30 days. It's not going to eat up a lot of time. Anyone can do it. And I think you'll be amazed at the difference that it makes for you. Secondly, choose to actively bless one person every day. Now, we need to be careful here because some of us can become egocentric enough that we go, I bless people just by showing up. They should just bask in the wonderfulness that is me. I hate to burst your bubble. You ain't all that. Neither am I. Truly blessing someone typically takes some deliberate effort and it takes some sacrifice. We're going to give up some energy. We're going to give up some time. We're going to listen more than we speak. We're going to spend some time with someone who no one ever listens to and just ask them some questions about, tell me about, where did you grow up again? And what was your growing up like? And what did you enjoy doing? That's blessing someone. That's one example. Third, recognize what God is doing in you and through you each day. Now, every part of that is important because recognize what God is doing in you. And if you can't pinpoint anything God is doing in you, then you may not be finding your meaning in God. Because He desires to be changing you. He desires to be doing something in you. So if you can't detect that, you either need practice in noticing it or nothing is happening. And then as an outflow of what God is doing in you, you're going to notice what He's doing through you. But He cannot do anything through you until He's doing something in you. Because if you're noticing effect around you and He's not doing anything in you, that's just you doing stuff. Probably to try to earn approval and prove your goodness. Good luck. These are some things that we need to get right. They're not easy for us. They're not natural for us. We need to stop grabbing hold of the things that we think will make us happy, that we think will satisfy, and trust God. It's the idea of holding those things in our life loosely, open hands, so that God can put things into our hands and God can take things out as He decides. And it doesn't become a war of wills, because guess what? He wins. It becomes a cooperative effort. I want to close with a final quote from Corrie ten Boom. She said this, it's so powerful and so simple. Hold everything in your hands lightly. Otherwise, it hurts when God pries your fingers open. Such simple advice, but we are so resistant to it. Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, thank you for today. Thank you for your goodness. God, I thank you that in the midst of a whole bunch of stuff that seems and is meaningless, that God, you show up with meaning. Thank you. Help us to hold on to you. Help us to seek after you. Help us to surrender to you. And not just live the same old, same old. We thank you for your goodness. We ask in Jesus' name, amen.